Okay, and Cher, I'll hand over to you now.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Housing and Homelessness panel. It's nice this evening we're joined by one of our tenant ambassadors, Brenda Walton, who works with our tenant involvement team. Welcome, Brenda. It's also great that we're joined by Stephen Gabriel, who's our newly appointed Executive Director for Communities in Housing. Welcome, Stephen. It's welcome to the panel. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah, would you like to take a moment just to introduce yourself, because we're all looking forward to working with you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my name's Stephen Gabriel. I took up post on the 6th of September, which seems a world away now. Previous to here, I was the Director of Housing and Communities in Wychavon and Malvern Hills. And one of the key pieces of work that I carried out while I was there was leading the everyone in task force across the county. Prior to that, I'd worked in Sandwell and Birmingham City Council. So there's quite a lot to do here in Oxford, and I'm looking forward to working with you all. I'm just getting to know the place and the people, so bear with me a little bit.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I remember seeing your name at the bottom of lots of letters when I worked for a Sandwell Member of Parliament. So it's nice to finally put a face to the name, even if it's just virtually
Okay.
so far. But welcome.
Thank you.
Let's move to agenda item number 1. Apologies. We have apologies from Liz Wade this evening. Do we have any other apologies?
No,
Councillor Liz Wade.
No apologies from other councillors, but Stephen Clark does send us apologies. He can't make the meeting.
All right, thank you. Okay, item number 2 is declarations of interest for the members of the panel, for the councillors. Do we have any declarations of interest? I have none. No, I see no hands, so we can move on. Work plan. We've got the work plan here for next month's meeting. Is everybody happy with that? Does anybody have any comments? We've got discretionary housing payment policy, further report on tenant involvement, and the results from the tenant satisfaction survey, and a report on empty homes. Is everybody happy with that for our business for November? I'm seeing nods, so I'm taking that as a yes. Great, thank you very much. Notes of previous meeting, item number 4. Can we agree the notes of the previous meeting? Any comments on those? I see none, and I have none. Thank you, Tom, for sterling job capturing the meeting. Thank you very much. Item number 5 is the performance dashboard. So this isn't something that we have at the moment. It would be difficult. It was something that I asked for this panel to receive at the last meeting. So it's being worked on. I'm talking to Stephen Clark about what performance measures we will receive at this panel, which I think would be really helpful for us. But I understand that because of the problems with the implementation of the new housing management system, it might take a little while for us to get those and have reliable performance measures to look at. So that's a work in progress. So let's move on to the next item. So we're going to move things around here because I think one of our tenant ambassadors is joining us slightly later in the meeting. So if we can take the item number 7 on housing and carbon reduction as the next item, and then we will move on to the social housing white paper after that. Is everyone in agreement with that? Everyone happy with that? Yeah. So we've got Malcolm Peake here to introduce the report. So over to you, Malcolm.
Thank you, Councillor. Good evening, everybody. Forgive me, I have a problem with my voice and a slight cold, so if anybody can't hear me or ask me to repeat, please do. I'm here to introduce the briefing paper for the Council Housing Carbon Reduction Plan and Energy Efficiency. Oxford City Council we have a target for achieving 95% of the housing stock to an EPC energy performance rating of C or above by 2030. We have a couple of government-funded initiatives in place at the moment, which we're working on. One is called LAD 1B, which is the central government funding. It's the local authority delivery scheme, and the second one is the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. Those two, one is currently in survey at the moment, the first one, which is LAD, and that is to undertake some whole house assessments and works for a variety of different works to contribute, and that was for that we received some funding from the central government, which is about 2/3 contribution for the works. And for the social housing, we're currently looking at a bid for that, which will begin in the next month or two. We've bid it. It will be on site in the next month, which is looking at 125 void properties, completing in March. So, so we have some works that we're doing at the moment, which is to achieve government funding for some of that. Outside of that, we need to focus clearly on the next few years of a significant amount of works on the rest of the stock to bring it up, where we have about 2,500 properties that require work on them to achieve the EPC rating of C or above. For which we have a budget that's been allocated of about 7 million over that period. Fundamentally, the moves that we need to do at the moment is identify where those works are, what's needed exactly, and then profile those into a program. To achieve that, we need to procure some external years to achieve it by 2030, and then we need to utilize the external procurement of advice that we need to go to. We use a system called Chrome, which is a system that advises us on those ratings. We are completing some final surveys across the stock, which will be completed by March next year, which will then give us an exact picture of the ratings and the works that need to be done. So on the report, I have given some examples of the different works that we will be looking at, which is some lighting solutions, some solar options, largely internal and external insulation, draft proofing. So that's the sort of fabric first approach. That will be followed up by M&E, heating systems, and that and those controls and automation systems that will be included within those packages of work. And we have given a draft program within the report that will look at as again is a draft, currently a draft program over that period of what we expect to be delivering to. And at the moment, we're looking at undertaking a procurement exercise in the next 2 months to procure those services, set to begin probably early next year, to undertake the advice and bring those packages together and to look at delivering them over the next 5 to 7 years. Thank you. If there's any questions at all.
Thank you very much. Over to members of the panel for questions first or comments. Anybody? This could be a very quick meeting. Councillor Fuweather.
Thank you. Could you clarify, Malcolm, whether the houses, sorry, homes you mention, are these just actually houses, or does this include flats as well?
It includes flats as well. So that again, you would be looking at whole block approaches on some of these. So on the smaller ones, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Lizzie.
Oh, thanks. It was a really interesting report to read. I think I just had a question about some of the delivery aspects, particularly the web form, and how whether there's going to be work undertaken to make sure that's sort of accessible and will be sort of open to, you know, those council tenants who maybe don't have access to things like the internet, and whether the tenant advisory board and tenant sort of representatives will be consulted as that gets developed.
Absolutely. So one of the things is that we have to obviously work. These are fairly radical changes to people's homes. So we're very keen that we have a large-scale engagement, absolutely, before anything happens. And at the same time, we already have officers that are advising on to tenants on fighting and combating fuel poverty. One of the obviously members may be aware is that the objective globally is to reduce our use of gas. If we were to increase that with electric solutions, it would plunge people into fuel poverty. So we are looking at compromises, and obviously we are working. We will work over the next 10 years very closely with residents to ensure that there's an equal balance, and that's largely why we're taking a fabric first approach, so we can actually reduce the need for heating of properties to actually reduce the costs. So we can reduce the cost on one hand, but that does have to be done very carefully so that we don't then increase issues like damp, condensation, and so on that can go around that. So it's quite a complex piece of work to make sure that each of the solutions actually works together and not against each other.
Nadine.
Hi, yes, thank you very much for the report, Malcolm. Is the council expecting more funding for this work from the central government over a period of 5 to 10 years?
So yes, I mean, we would very much hope, and we are proactive in looking for funding sources and grants that are available. I would say though that obviously these grants are very specific and they have a very specific time frame, and they are for specific pieces of work. So we have to be aware, whilst we are seeking that funding, that they are not the solution. And it is more about them fitting into the work that we're undertaking, as opposed to designing the work around those, because to do that would not necessarily achieve the targets that we have.
Thank you. Lizzie, is that an old hand, or do you want to come back in?
Oh, that's a new hand. So I just had another question as well. In terms of obviously looking at lots of different ways that you can improve people's homes and get them more energy efficient. I mean, this might be covered or, you know, not able to answer yet, but how many of these do you think will pretty much everyone need to move out while these works are being done? If so, how's that being obviously factored into the whole process as well? Or is that something that you're sort of considering, I guess, in the round in terms of that cost benefit analysis of possibility versus, you know, the ideals?
Yeah. Absolutely. So, first of all, we would look at complementing programs that are already existing, investment programs, capital works programs, where we can to underpin this. I don't anticipate there'll be significant amounts of decanting at all for this, because it's the nature of the works will be things like loft insulation, windows, roofs, and things which can be done with residents in situ. And obviously we would treat it like a normal project where we would have that engagement and consultation with the tenants and residents across the board. part of this is about having that external guidance, and yeah, it's very early days in these terms about knowing the exact nature of what works in what properties are required. So once we have the specialist support on side, once we've procured that, they will be developing those programs of works, and then we'll have a better idea. But certainly I don't at this stage anticipate significant amounts of decanting.
Councillor Jarvis.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you so much for the report. It's incredibly enlightening, and particularly the table on page 4 I found incredibly helpful and sort of understanding the housing stock. I guess one kind of query I have that stems from that is immediately below the table, the line says there are 2,515 properties that require work to get to C or above. And within the table, it's notable that there are very, very few that are in the or above category. So in terms of the kind of program of works to get the remaining properties that are below that to C or above, do you have a sense of what the potential is for getting some of those properties into that or above category of B and A, or is it largely going to be almost entirely landing in that C category?
Yeah, it's very hard to tell at this stage without that program of works, because it could be one item that we implement that will move the property into a category C, or it could be multiple works that will make it into an A or B. At this stage, it's difficult to know without those programs of work and scope of works and the specifications to be able to come back and sort of answer that with certainty as to where we would land after that. At the moment, we know what is in poor and what needs to be moved up to a C and above. That's where we are at this point. Once we've engaged with the consultants and we have the full data on the surveys back, we'll be able to predict that with greater accuracy.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question which is about tenant involvement and engagement. You have touched on this slightly in response to Councillor Diggins's question, but just from the report, there is a mention of tenant engagement, but that very much seems to be sort of like getting tenants to sign up to have works done in their home, works which the scope of which have already been decided. I'd like some reassurance, and maybe you can tell us a bit more about, do you plan to work with the tenant involvement team to actually involve tenants, in the procurement, in the scope of the works? Particularly some of it is very straightforward, I know, and probably quite technical, and there aren't a lot of options involved. But some of it, particularly as you said, it's really about how people sort of enjoy their homes. And when you're talking about like automation of heating and things like that, and the choice of component elements, windows, doors, etc. There probably is a lot of scope for tenants to have a say. So I'd just like some reassurance that you're going to be working really hard to make that happen as best as you can.
Absolutely, Councillor. It's critical that we engage with people. It's not just about fitting a component item into a property. It is about how we live in the properties and how we operate those properties, and we need to be supporting residents for this to be successful. And that means having buy-in, having information, and having all residents as a party to that. So yes, we fully will look at including those into the program and engaging. And actually, when I say engaging, I mean sort of really being active participants where we can. Perhaps through the use of panels into the global program as it goes. This is obviously an area that people are very passionate about. As I'm sure all the councillors know, it is a very high-profile area at the moment for all councils for the country. And it's certainly something that we would encourage people to be taking part in.
Great. So you'd welcome a recommendation from this panel along those lines that
absolutely
you work closely with the tenant involvement team on getting tenant input as early as possible into programs. Exactly. Can I see support from colleagues for that, for a recommendation?
I was
Yeah.
just wanted to ask, is there any extra support for people who have got mental health problem or disabled, people who have tenants who have disabilities?
Yes, we would look at that obviously as part of it. It's as I said earlier, it's actually very early days to know the impact without knowing the exact works and the extent required on any individual properties. It's very difficult at this stage to say what that impact would be on individuals. But certainly, absolutely, the process. We do, as I mentioned, we have 2 officers that are actually in Bill's team that visit people and advise on fuel poverty and assisting with improving situations. So that in itself is kind of we have some of that skill already in. We do that currently, and that's something we would be enhancing and ramping up as part of the programs to encourage.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more recommendations other than my one? No, anything else on this item? If not, we'll wrap it up. Tony?
Yeah, just a quick question regarding to home improvements. Has the council gave any thought to the government's replacement of boiler scheme at all for long-term for the future?
I can't specifically comment on that, unfortunately, at this stage. But I would say that we would be considering everything that is available, and we are looking at all the schemes that as and when the government come up to be looking at the replacement of all components, be it boilers or other items. There is a move to eliminate gas heating, so gas boilers. As I mentioned earlier, though, there is a risk in doing that if we were to simply replace them with electric boilers alone, then people wouldn't be able to afford their electric bills and it would plunge people into fuel poverty. So it has to be done very, very carefully. There is a lot of speculation in the industry at the moment about alternatives, whether it's hydrogen and those sort of areas. And that still continues to be a very fast moving sort of perspective for us at the moment. So we are looking at all areas, but we do have to tread carefully that we don't embark on something that would be out of date within 5 years, because it wouldn't be beneficial in the long term.
Councillor Linda Smith, is that possible to add with specific consideration for people with mental health and disabilities in your recommendation? What you just recommended, is it possible to add with specific consideration for people who have mental health problems or people who have disabilities?
I think that might make sense to be a separate recommendation, because is that more about it's probably more relevant in terms of the engagement, in terms of the implementation of the programme and getting people to sign up and having people be content with having the work done on their home, I would have thought, rather than especially important in terms of early engagement with designing the programmes. Would that be correct? So maybe have that as a separate recommendation.
I was going to recommend that as well, Chair, because I think it'll be far clearer when writing to pull the 2 apart. So yeah, to take that as a second recommendation.
Okay.
Is that right, indeed?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's great. Okay, so I think that concludes that item. So thank you very much, Malcolm, for coming this evening.
Thank you.
So let's move on to the next item, which is a brilliant briefing that we've received on the social housing white paper. I personally found it very illuminating and informative. So thank you very much, Bill. So over to you to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, when I started to prepare for this meeting, I thought, well, the social housing white paper is 76 pages long. I'm sure I can condense it. And after about 2 pages, I realised it was already quite succinct and had lots and lots of tasks and actions in it already. So I decided to fall on the on the PowerPoint presentation. So, and obviously, hopefully, you've all had a chance to see it. I'll share my screen if I may, Chair. If you can let me know when I'm doing so, that would be useful. Thank you. Right, can you see the presentation?
No.
Not yet.
Okay, bear with me. How about now? Can you see the presentation now?
Not yet.
Oh, I'll just go back to. Right.
Okay, yeah, we can see that.
And hopefully you can see it slightly larger now. Okay. Yeah, as I said, the white paper came out in November. There's a background to it. Obviously, the tragedy at Grenfell really brought into sharp focus the need to focus on tenants and safety. And the government then went on to hold countrywide roadshows and wide consultations, resulting in the Green Paper in 2018, and a lot of work around that, which culminated in the publication of the Social Housing White Paper, the Charter, last November. It does link very heavily to Building Safety Bill and the Fire Safety Bill, and it will be driven by legislation and regulation, which hasn't arrived yet, but is going to. And in the Charter itself, and certainly speaking with people on the Ministry's regulatory sounding board, there's a very, very clear expectation that landlords should not wait until the regulation and legislation comes in before they act. So there's 17 chapters. The first one, to be safe in your home, know how your landlord is performing, have your complaints dealt with promptly and fairly, be treated with respect, to have your voice heard by your landlord, to have a good quality home and neighbourhood to live in, and to be supported to take your first step to ownership. First chapter is the one which clearly for many people who watch the events unfold at Grenfell is quite, you know, foremost. The Building Safety Bill with the enhanced regulatory regime, and that includes design, construction, day-to-day management and maintenance of the higher risk buildings, which is those over 18 stories, which is our current 5 tower blocks, with Lucy Faithful will add to that, with residents having a strong voice. The fire safety consultation, being supporting a social sector building safety engagement best practice group is what the government put in place, and they published a fire safety bill to clarify the scope of the fire safety order and its application in multi-occupied residential buildings. And that essentially, when they say multi-occupied, they basically mean every flat block, so not just the towers. So things that they're going to be doing, the regulator is going to strengthen the consumer regulation objectives to explicitly include safety more than ever before. The regulator for social housing has been, some described it as being slightly more light touch in recent years, and there's a very, very keen focus that going forward they should have some real teeth. They're requiring social landlords to identify a nominated person responsible for compliance, and they're requiring the regulator to work directly with the health and safety executive on sharing information with the building safety regulator, which is obviously a new regulator. They've already completed the consultation on requiring smoke alarms in social housing, which we have, but also introducing new expectations for carbon monoxide alarms, which obviously we'll take on board, and consulting on measures to ensure that social housing residents are protected from harm by poor electrical safety, and continue to work with the Building Safety Engagement Best Practice Group. There's lots of things involved in safety. You've got the engagement with residents is crucial. There's to be a building safety manager, which can be a body or a number of people within an organisation such as ours, but there must be a named accountable person. And we need a two-way engagement process with residents on how safety is managed. And in the tower blocks, specifically, the residents automatically receive information about the fire and structural protections in place to manage the risks. Clearly, access to a quick and effective route to raise complaints about fire and structural safety needs to be in place. Essentially, the building safety manager is responsible for dealing with inquiries, but if a resident feels that that there is an immediate concern, they can raise it straight away to the regulator. Obviously, up-to-date and readily available information to all residents on understanding their roles and obligations, and so that they fulfill their own safety responsibilities. And PEEPs, which is basically having, although it's at the moment in the recommendations, we fully expect that PEEPs, personal emergency evacuation plans, will become mandatory for all tower blocks. We have them in place for our tower blocks ahead of that, but we still need more work to do to make sure that it's an annual process, which I know that Steve Gabriel and I were discussing the other day walking around one of the tower blocks. There is going to be more than ever unprecedented consultation and ongoing engagement. It's different from resident involvement. Resident involvement in terms of Simon's team is very much about getting residents involved with what we do, co-regulation, which is the management and development of services, and being part of this group and this body and holding us to account. Engagement is something different, and I'll cover those a little bit later. But these are new areas of work. There's a lot of information that we need to provide, and of course, resident safety comes first. There is a staffing resource that will be required to deliver the requirements of the charter, and the housing revenue account will need to provide that resource to deliver it. All being well, we'll be able to have the resource in place quite soon. The second one is knowing how your landlord is performing. Knowing tenants being able to hold their landlord to account. The regulator has actually now published a set of draft consultation measures for landlords, and we'll see, and that will be mandatory, and they will need to be published. The access to information scheme for social housing tenants is mainly related to registered providers, because we've already got freedom of information, which directly affects councils, but registered providers of social housing don't have that currently. Complete transparency in publishing and reporting of expenditure, including Stephen's salary, and I'm sure the chief exec salary as well. This is, it's one of the things where they want to have these very transparent and to be in accessible format. Tenants being able to challenge whether money is being spent on the things that matter to them, and this is, it's really important. This is tenants' rent money. Also, the landlords are required to identify a senior person in the organisation who's responsible for the consumer standards set by the regulator, and to report to every tenant on such matters at least once a year, if not continuously, using technology. Now, Simon's team are currently working on the annual report, which should be out in the next couple of months. But obviously, being able to deliver that information continuously using technology is complementary, if not the way forward for everyone. So, knowing how your landlord is measuring performance, these are the proposals thus far. So, decent home standard compliance, and there is something later on decent home standard. Responsive repairs completed right first time, which we all know is a bugbear of tenants, where people might have several visits, and obviously satisfaction with repairs and maintenance. And then quite explicitly compliance on health and safety aspects. We're getting much better, but this is making sure that every element of compliance is covered and nailed on, and obviously tenant satisfaction with the health and safety of their home, not just the general condition of it. Number of complaints relative to the size and percentage of complaints resolved within agreed timescale, satisfaction of complaints, number of complaints, listening to views and taking notice of them, and tenant satisfaction with landlords' engagement with tenants. Communal areas meeting the required standard, which is a new one in terms of having something that's published across the board. Number of complaints relating to communal areas relative to the size of the landlord. Keeping communal areas safe and clean, and neighbourhood associated with a home, which we have been measuring for a number of years. Antisocial behaviour complaints, handling of antisocial behaviour, and overall satisfaction with the service the landlord provides, which has been a common theme with surveys over the years. Annual report will need to be tweaked. And well, more than tweaked. It will need to have an overhaul to include these additional elements of transparency and the level of detail. There's a focus on building safety and compliance, and ideally we're going to be able to provide real-time data, and we'll need the technology to support the publication of that. Greater scrutiny on the housing revenue account spend. For those members who are not aware, the housing revenue account is ring-fenced by statute, so the rental income can only be spent on activities that relate to the management and maintenance of the tenants' homes. And there's a series of categories which are core plus, and non-core activities, where the spend is either to be from the housing revenue account or from the general fund for non-core, and there should be an appropriate level of contribution from each account, depending on the number of people who are affected and benefit. We need to do more work with the ambassadors to understand spending, because the housing revenue account is and understanding it is a specialist area of accounting. So even for housing staff who are not accountants, it's specialist. So we'll be doing more work with ambassadors to help them to understand the spending. And obviously we will need to put in place the responsible person for ensuring the standards are being met. Complaints, the building safety bill removed the democratic filter. Sorry.
Jim, could I perhaps suggest it may be worthwhile asking if people have questions thus far, because otherwise it might get
we'll be losing things. Thanks,
lost. Are you happy to do that, Chair?
Yes.
Sorry, did I phase out? I was suggesting that we take questions to this point, just in case anyone had any questions thus far, because I was worried that otherwise
I think I'd rather continue to the end, because I think some questions might be sort of quite general and not be to do with a certain, specific chapter. So should we keep going?
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. Good suggestion. The Building Safety Bill removed the democratic filter. We at Oxford City Council didn't actually implement the democratic filter here, which was introduced by the 2011 forgotten the act, the Localism Act, and that we didn't actually implement it here, but they've actually removed that filter, which was thought to actually slow down people reaching the Ombudsman and being able to take their complaints to the Ombudsman quickly. So essentially a third stage of complaints process, where in many organisations you might have had members or residents or even the MP being the final stage of the authority's complaints process. The Ombudsman Service has expanded, aiming to halve its decision times by March 2022. Its decision times are around about a year and a half at the moment, which is not particularly good. But they have increased the Ombudsman's powers, and the Ombudsman's published a new complaint handling code, and which introduces a two-stage complaint process for housing, not three, with a 10-day maximum response time. and this has been discussed with colleagues at CMT, and we're moving in that direction. There are some things we need to put in place as an organisation to reach there, but a two-stage complaint process will be hopefully much more satisfactory for all residents across the piece, not just within housing. So they're supporting improved complaint handling by the landlords, and there will be stronger action by the Housing Ombudsman. And the Ministry is running an awareness campaign to publicise complaining, and we included a piece in our most recent Tenants in Touch publication to promote complaints, because you learn from complaints, and if people don't complain, they just let things happen. The Ministry is undertaking a statutory requirement for the Ombudsman and regulator to work together, and also making the Ombudsman a statutory consultee on any changes to the consumer standard. These don't directly affect us, but it does show that how they're trying to pull together the different cogs in the wheel in terms of how housing organisations are actually held to account. So I mentioned two-stage process. There's a set definition of a complaint that's been provided by the Housing Ombudsman. We need to publish exclusions. So what are our vexatious complaint policies? We need to update our policy and process so it's available online, and put a reasonable adjustments policy in place as well. We've got 2 complaint officers that we're going to be recruiting to, and they will have the investigating autonomy and authority to deal with complaints. And we want to continue to promote tenants being able to complain. I don't know whether any of you noticed with the ITN campaign or series of programs on damp and so on. A few weeks ago, at the beginning of September, the story actually covered 2 horrendous examples of damp and mould in social housing, and the tenants hadn't even complained to their landlord because they didn't think they'd do anything about it, which is, so yeah, it's beyond belief. We've got to really encourage people to complain and speak to us and report things. To be treated with respect. The remit of the regulator, I said it, I won't say it was toothless before, but it was quite light touch. They've strengthened it significantly. They are going to proactively monitor and drive compliance with the standards and remove the serious detriment test, which basically was so difficult. You had to be so bad for the regulator to intervene, that everyone would have known it's coming. So they're now going to introduce routine inspections for the largest landlords every 4 years. And obviously, like they have actually said, like any kind of organisation, if anyone puts their head above the parapet, then they can expect an early visit. Obviously, there's a number of organisations who I'm sure are ready in themselves. Mentioned earlier the objectives to explicitly cover safety and transparency, and they are going to have the power to publish a code of practice on consumer standards. They may not do that, but they're going to have the power to do that. The level of fines that the regulator can impose on landlords is capped currently. I don't know what it is, but they are removing the level of fine, the cap on the level of fines, and introducing performance improvement plans. And they can actually parachute organisations in to actually deal with problems if they're particularly bad. And there's a clear expectation for landlords to self-refer breaches with the regulatory standards. And essentially, to not self-refer is going to be seen, in the worst light. Continued co-regulation, and this is what I was speaking about earlier with Simon's team, ensuring that the ambassadors and the tenants continue to be recruited, and it's a responsibility of councillors in this instance to be assured that we are complying with the standards, and obviously with tenants being part of this panel and working with us on service improvement and all the activities Simon's team take. That is the co-regulatory element. Driving and embedding culture change. It's a collective responsibility here of local authority councillors on safety, and that's all councillors. They have certainly in both in the white paper and in seminars, that it's been made very clear that the ministry acknowledges it's the most difficult challenge is going to be with councils, local authorities, stockholding councils, to actually do this, where housing is not their sole focus. But obviously they want housing to be the sole focus, even if there are many other elements that the council must consider. And a nominated person responsible for compliance with health and safety requirements. To have your voice heard by your landlord, obviously seeking out best practice, and I know that Simon and his team have been speaking to colleagues and even on this particular topic, been speaking with colleagues in Norwich, delivering new opportunities and an empowerment program, and this is for the regulator to actually is actually going to aim to deliver this, to support more effective engagement. And I mean, we're really looking at training programs for tenants to help them become more involved and more engaged. And there is a requirement to review the professional training and development, so that those staff who are involved in housing and decision making in housing have the appropriate levels of professional qualification and are able to deal with people, not just in terms of legal issues, but also, as you'll see later on, mental health and other issues. Engagement is, I feel, it's more than just resident involvement with landlords. We do need to help tenants to engage with us. Part of that is to start to engage with tenants much more, and that's tailored engagement for individual tenants. One thing I'm very conscious of is, at the moment, if someone hasn't had, for example, a tenancy matter, so a death or a birth or a transfer, and they've just been quite happily being a tenant and paying the rent and getting the gas serviced every year, and the odd repair, we might not have spoken to them for 10 years, which is, you know, it's not because we wouldn't want to, it's just we're not currently resourced to. One thing, it was very clear from the housing conference that I went to in Manchester the other week, is that what's already started to happen in the sector is that RPs, specifically RPs, but local authorities to a certain extent are a little bit behind the curve because of the budget process, but meeting tenants personally and find out what matters to each tenant, and being able to, this is what I see, check on the general condition of the home. So if there are unreported issues, check on the general well-being, protected characteristics, contact preferences, and also intend to try and get this engagement to involve the promotion of the tenant portal, so we can look to move channel shift and effective reporting of repairs. And if that doesn't necessarily work for that particular tenant because they don't have a smart device, then have they got a friend or a family member, and also to go into the community, because there's many community groups who are able to actually spread news, knowledge, and learning. And I think in order for the council to achieve channel shift with our tenant base, which is complementary to the walk-in and the phone calls, but we really need to be out there speaking to tenants as individuals. Have a good quality home and neighbourhood to live in. It's mentioned the decarbonisation of social housing and grants for that. There is a clear emphasis on health and wellbeing initiatives, and part of that, I think, is from the learning from COVID and the need for space, so promoting more and better green spaces. The decent home standard is going to be reviewed. Consultations are already underway. It will include decarbonisation, but it'll also look to improve the communal areas. It's expected that decent homes will include the areas around the flat block and on the wider estate near to social housing. Mentioned COVID on housing conditions, professionalisation. That's what I mentioned, but also to work with people with mental health needs, to encourage best practice for landlords. And we've got a large number of people who we sometimes come across for the first time who may be, face quite complex mental health needs, or sometimes less so, but just need a little bit of assistance. Clarify the role of agencies involved in tackling antisocial behaviour, and signpost tenants. There's quite a strong emphasis on dealing with antisocial behaviour much more effectively, and getting agencies to actually work together better. Considering results of allocations evidence regarding housing allocations, and again that's quite a new area of work that is going to pose some challenges. Greater support for those facing antisocial behaviour. The Ministry is working with the National Housing Federation and Local Government Association to encourage landlords to let tenants know about their right to make a community trigger application. The regulator is going to review the regulatory standards as well, so we should have clear policies that actually impose what the standards are. So over and above what we may already have, domestic abuse is going to be a high priority, and of course supporting the armed forces community. Greater engagement. Malcolm talked earlier about greater engagement with tenants on carbon reduction initiatives, green space, an increased regime of estate quality inspections, which will need resourcing, a strong emphasis on improving ASB services and support for victims and those victims of domestic abuse, and the estate to be included with ASB in the performance indicator regime. And the final chapter is to be supported to take your first step to ownership, and there are a raft of initiatives in there to promote the building of social rent homes and ownership, and helping residents into home ownership with a new shared ownership model, continuing to support the right to buy and leasehold reform, and supporting leaseholders. And hopefully members will have noticed that we had our first shared ownership leaseholders moved in very recently in the last couple of weeks, which is in Rosehill, which is the first traditional shared ownerships that this council's had. We had two other odd ones, shall I say, which weren't really considered shared ownership, but these are first more traditional shared ownerships. The shared ownership model, the new one which is coming in, will affect some of the shared owners in next year rather than those this year. It's not finalised yet. So in summary, the social housing white paper is very much about the council, and that's not just my service, which includes the tenancy management and involvement teams, but the council as a whole, who deliver services to tenants as a landlord. So that's the antisocial behaviour team, that's the incomes team that collect the rent, that's those that provide sustainment assistance, that's those in the contact centre, that's those in ODS who work on the day-to-day repairs, on gas servicing, on estate management, on the actual caretaking and cleaning, and the grounds maintenance. All across the piece, these are areas where the council provides services as a landlord to tenants. There's a wide range of activities in this charter for social housing tenants, and lots of new work. There's lots of engagement work which will be essential to understand the tenants' concerns and needs, and there's a focus on tenants first, listening and respecting them, and finding out what affects them. Clearly, home and quality of the home, the estate environment, fire safety, building safety, the consumer standards and ASB. And there will be, undoubtedly, to achieve this, a significant budget investment needed to deliver. And clearly, from the outset of the social housing white paper, don't wait for legislation and regulation, as I said earlier. So next steps, we've carried out an initial gap analysis. We've completed that and devised a high-level action plan, which delves into the 7 chapters, breaking down into a series of objectives. We've assigned owners to those. There is much wider responsibility across council services to deliver all of this to tenants, and we will be looking to appoint a lead delivery officer to ensure that all of the elements of the social white paper are delivered to a high standard and on time. There will be clearly a massive need to have an ongoing dialogue with tenants on this journey. As I mentioned earlier, in the budget round, providing it gets through, there are a series of measures in there in the bids to actually support successful delivery. Hopefully you'll have seen the little dinosaur. So if you do want to read the social housing white paper in full, there are a lot of pictures in there, but it is, I say, it is quite a succinct publication. So if you do want to indulge, please do. So I'll now take any questions, if that's all right.
Thank you so much, Bill. I mean, there's so much there, isn't there? I could spend a whole day talking about this.
Yeah.
So we do want the panel to make some, helpful and concrete recommendations about this. But I think the way I'd like to do this is, for us to have a bit of general discussion and questions and ideas tonight, but to actually return to this maybe in December or January. And what I'd like to see, and it's probably very similar to the action plan you mentioned, so I hope it won't be too much extra work, but I'd like to see, like for all those items listed in that presentation, I'd like to see a box sort of saying, is this something we're doing already? If not, what are the steps you plan to take? What are the challenges? So if we could have something like that to come back to us in a month or two, I think that would be really helpful. And at that stage, we can really hone any recommendations that we want to make. Does that sound sensible? Does Tom or anyone else want to tell me that that's a bad idea?
Chair, I'm just checking the dates of the meeting after November. I have a sneaking suspicion that our next date is actually in March, so there's a little bit of a gap. Let me just double check. If you continue, and I'll find it.
We might have to slip an extra meeting in, possibly.
Yeah, we can certainly do that, Chair. If you just
let's open it up to some general discussion anyway, and I'll let everyone else go first, and hopefully you'll cover all the things that I would have raised, so you don't have to listen to me droning on for too much. Okay, Councillor Fuweather.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Bill, for a really informative presentation. I've got a couple of questions. How many non-council social housing landlords and properties are there in the city? Do you have any feel for that?
I don't have it to hand. We've got a number of partners who operate in the city, from Ocha, A2 Dominion, Green Square, and others, and they are, and obviously Catalyst as well, who are development partners on Blackbird Leys. There are quite a number. Probably, I mean, I can certainly get the information for next time, but in terms of examples of turnover, which gives you probably an idea of scale, we've got 7,600 odd, going towards 7,700 properties, and we normally relet around 330 per year. And the RPs who operate in the city, they use our own choice-based letting system, and they bring that total per year round up to about 500. So they operate at 170. So lower than us, but still significant.
And following on from that, I couldn't. I read the paper a couple of times, and I couldn't see whether the council have any powers or responsibility for overseeing non-council social housing landlords.
No, we don't. The regulator.
We don't.
The regulator.
It goes straight to the regulator.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
The private sector safety team do investigate RSLs though as well, don't they? If it's like a safety issue.
Yeah, they in terms of regulatory side of things, they can do that. Yeah. So if there was a serious issue there, but in terms of influencing policy and so on, we do have some influence on the tenancy strategy. where we can say we like this or we don't like this or we'd like you to do that, and they're required to have due regard to it, which is not necessarily. Generally, our colleagues who work with us in OREP, which is the group, Oxford Registered Affordable Providers of Housing, we all work together on that. So generally, we rarely go in different directions in terms of strategy, but in terms of the type of activities that I've been describing here, much of this will be sitting with the regulator.
Okay. Councillor Belly-Summers.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation, Bill. It's just a comment. I would say what's missing here is similar legislation and regulation in the private rental sector. Obviously, you asked some of my questions here, but in Oxford, there is a higher proportion of people who are private tenants, and some live in accommodation who are not safe or would not pass health and safety inspection. And we know this social housing paper won't prevent people to lose their homes as a furlough and a universal credit uplift land. And so what I'm saying to that is, it is great, all of this, to regulate the public sector, but I'm looking forward to the private landlords licensing to make some progress with the private tenants. Thank you very much. Anyway, thank you.
Good point. Thank you, Nadine. Tony.
Yeah, the council's already taking steps. I'm part of the Housing Ombudsman's resident panel, and I've been attending their meetings. One of the things with this new white paper, it gives the Housing Ombudsman has started to use their teeth. And you will see from the Inside Housing newsletters how many councils and housing associations have been downgraded or heavily fined for bad management of their properties. So, you know, Oxford's certainly going in the right direction. They're certainly using tenants like myself with the Housing Ombudsman. And I think it's an important step, you know, to show, you know, that Oxford City Council is one of the leading councils in tenant involvement.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, I'm just pressing buttons which I shouldn't press. Does anyone else want to come in? No, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah, just briefly echoing the thanks that was given for the presentation. It's incredibly helpful. In terms of the penultimate, I think penultimate slide, this point around the continued support for right to buy. Is there anything in that is in any way helpful in terms of right to buy and the obligations that there are likely to continue to be into that with regards to any additional flexibility that councils might get around right to buy?
I think, well,
Bill, before you answer that, one of the points I wanted to raise was sort of related to that. So shall I do that as well? Because you might be able to answer them both together. So it was just about, yeah, with that sort of new duty to support tenants into home ownership, what we can do to support tenants into the shared ownership properties that we're building as an alternative to them exercising their right to buy. Obviously, that would be in our interest, in that we, you know, retain the stock. So yeah, is that something that we might be able to look at?
We can do. I mean, it's one of the issues where, I mean, obviously secure tenant is a secure tenant, and the expenditure on rent is obviously much lower than a mortgage, or indeed on a shared ownership mortgage and rental provision. So, but in terms of Oxford and right to buy generally, the numbers have been dropping because in many cases, even with the discount, because it's capped, most of the homes are simply unaffordable for someone unless they're left an inheritance or some other windfall. There are obviously different people who are in the fortunate position to be able to buy, but the numbers have dropped significantly over the last few years. Certainly, when we've had the new properties, shared ownership properties in Rose Hill, we were basically inundated with inquiries very, very quickly, and essentially they were essentially all earmarked for sale long before they were completed. We've got a programme of shared ownership which we'll continue to promote, and if people are interested in it, and I think it is something that we should look to promote to our existing tenants, they may actually find it a better route into owning their own home, which is actually not as expensive as going the whole right to buy route. So yeah, I think it is certainly something worth promoting, and I'd be encouraging our marketing colleagues and the housing company to possibly look to do some work with us on that.
And how about possibly incentivizing so that it is an attractive option compared to the right to buy, which obviously, it has that discount that tenants can benefit from. Can we undertake to look at that and consider that in future when the shared ownership housing is available?
I think we'll have to look into it. There might be some restrictions. Obviously, there are elements on affordability which need to be considered on shared ownership properties, but we'll certainly consider it and see whether there's any ways of incentivizing. Usually, if we take shared ownership aside, a lot of landlords had an incentive program, going back 20 years or so now, where they offered people a cash sum to give up their council tenancy and go and move somewhere else, but the condition was that they didn't come back and didn't become a tenant in the future of the council and so on. So we'll have a look into it. I can't promise that we'll definitely be able to do it, but we'll have a look into it and see if there's any other landlords doing something.
Fair enough. Thank you. So some points I'd like to raise, just on the safety considerations, particularly in light of what it says about, don't wait and get on with this stuff. That, there are some there obviously that are really critical. Can you give us some reassurance, that we are meeting those requirements? I'm thinking particularly about the personal evacuation plans. Are we confident that we know, of all our tenants who need those? How accurate is our survey work? And have we got those in place for everybody? Have we got the named person that's required?
No, we don't have that yet. The named person is something that will have to be considered going up the chain. I'm suspecting that I'm looking at Mr. Gabriel here as possibly being the named person. Is more likely, they're likely to be executive positions, so within the organisation. In terms of PEEPs, we did carry out significant efforts to, I think we managed to get all bar 2 or 3, and they were leaseholders who refused to give us information on all the residents in the tower blocks, where we identified everyone in the tower block who needed a PEEP, and we have recorded their details, and those who, some people might have to stay in their flat, so they literally can't get out. Some people can make it as far as the refuge area at the stairwell, and other people can go up and down the stairs. But then you've got different people who've got different circumstances. It could be pregnancy, young children, and so on. So it was a year and a half ago we did our first round, and we do need to, as I mentioned before, with Stephen's encouragement, we are swiftly moving to an annual PEEP review. We have been doing it when tenancies change, and obviously asking when people have a change of circumstance to let them know. But best practice is that we do actually do an annual review, which again, as far as the fire safety work in my, again, I mentioned budget proposals and the resident engagement associated with fire safety. I do have some resource asks in there specifically to do this engagement and to ensure that all the peeps are up to date all of the time with an annual review. And hopefully we'll be able to have that resource, but I'll have to see. It's a process to be followed through with that. But certainly at the moment we do have peeps in place for the tower block residents.
And where we've got people on upper floors who can't leave their home,
Yeah.
I mean, that isn't just a problem in an emergency, is it? It's not ideal the rest of the time. So, you know, what are we doing in terms of looking at providing them with the opportunity to transfer into more suitable accommodation?
Absolutely. I mean, in most cases, if the people are not happy with the with having the lifts or so on, then we do encourage people to move to level access accommodation, and they get appropriate priority on our transfer register. Those who do, what we do with peeps is we actually hold them in the girder boxes, which are in the ground floor outside the front of the tower, so that fire service can immediately access plans and details of who would need assistance, either who'd be actually in their flat or on a stairwell. We've got a difference. Well, 4 of the tower blocks have got a system whereby if there's either a sprinkler activation or a smoke alarm sounder activation on a floor, that floor would evacuate and the floor above and below it would evacuate. The other one, and the reason why it's only partial, is that if you did a full evacuation on 4 of the towers, there's only 1 stairwell. So a whole tower coming down would block the fire service coming up. Obviously, the fire service could change that arrangement on their instruction if they feel it's appropriate. Hockmore Tower is the other one, has 2 stairwells, so they have a full evacuation process in place. And again, in all of the towers, we do have girder boxes that the fire service access straight away.
Okay, thank you. My next point was about the recommended performance measures in the bill. Will our new fancy housing management system allow us to track those performance measures when it's running?
It will. I mean, there are some really positive things coming out. I've been working very closely, as I do anyway, with colleagues from direct services, and they've now got, obviously they've got live data on complaints, and quite well, it's quite revelationary really in terms of the real-time data that they're able to work with and drill down into. It's going to be such a transformation when it's all settled down, and bit by bit in different parts of the organisation it is. And I say the first example of that is complaints in Oxford Direct Services. It's how they're actually running it is I'm incredibly impressed. You know, the information, and the other information is it's readily available. The areas where we will need to introduce new measures will be estate inspections, so the qualitative type work, but in terms of satisfaction, ODS have already started to do the real-time transactional satisfaction survey, so where people have had a visit and work carried out, they're automatically getting asked for information like you would do if Sky or so on. How do we do today? You know, rate is 1 to 5. Did we show a badge? Yes, no. So if, for example, they can actually drill down to the operative, so they can say, Fred, you're always on time, but you're really messy. Bob, you're late, but you did it first time and you were so polite. It was great. Work on those issues, you know, so they can actually deal with individuals. It really is that sophisticated, which is, you know, really good.
Okay, great. My next point was on the tackling loneliness and the meeting the tenants on a regular basis. Just interested to know, you know, how far away, or you know, how are we doing on that so far with our tenancy management officers? And it seems to me that there's a particular need for that in our sheltered blocks. I don't think we have TMOs that just focus on sheltered accommodation anymore. You know, it's just the general TMOs for that area, but perhaps that might be somewhere to start in terms of upping that contact with tenants in the sheltered blocks.
Yeah, I mean, the tenancy management officers, because there's an awful lot of additional work has come into their service area in the past few years, and they've really they're not even able to, don't have the capacity currently to even do the routine home visits that they used to do a number of years ago, which is why we need to speak to people and get out and engage, and not just do it for the when people are actually needing a tenancy management service. We've got to do it as a matter of routine. I would, the former sheltered schemes, I know people still call them sheltered schemes, but they don't meet any definition of sheltered anymore. In those, while there are obviously a concentration of older people, there are people around in that scheme community, and we've got over 3,500, or around 3,000, sorry, council tenant households where one tenant is over 65. So I don't think our focus is really going to be just on those who already have a community. It's really getting out to everyone. And certainly I agree, age profiling in terms of people, I think across the stock is the way to go, because if we've got you know, an 89-year-old who's on their own, who's not seen a council officer for years and years and years, that's the person who lives in a normal block. That's the person we want to be tackling and trying to work with and speak with in terms of dealing with isolation. And it could be that, you know, a very simple introduction to your neighbours and building that rapport is something that we can actually facilitate. So there's lots of areas that we'd like to move into and to engage effectively and communicate and to deal with these issues. And anytime you do any kind of campaign which involves going to see people who you haven't seen for a long time, will generate a lot more work. We found that obviously from the COVID work on the hubs, where people that we'd never spoken to before were suddenly coming to us with problems, and we're able to help them out as an organisation. And this will undoubtedly result in similar impacts.
Okay, thanks. My next point is about the HRA, and is this going to cause us problems in terms of the way we use the HRA at the moment, to go towards our community centres and youth work? Is that something we need to be mindful of during this budget setting process? And then conversely, I wondered, because of how it talks about promoting and improving green spaces, should that be an area where we might be able to use some of the HRA money in a way that we don't at the moment in our parks?
Yeah, this is one of the things that we've got to be very, very careful of, is that all local authorities who've got stock have at some point or another been stretched with their general fund, and especially in the more recent times where the housing revenue account has been the more healthy of the budgets. I think it's something that the regulator will be looking at. They may not look at straight away. I think it's an area of risk, but it may not be an area of risk straight away. I'm sure Stephen's also thinking, yeah, we've got challenges on the general fund, we've got challenges in communities, we've got challenges in youth. One of the things that happened, it was 2 weeks before the publication of the social housing white paper. Actually, the Ministry of Social Housing published a reminder of guidance of the HRA ring fence, and with that, it actually set out or reminded stockholding authorities of the core services, Core Plus, which would include support for tenants. It could include some of the activities on an estate, like street wardens, but we've got CRT and we contribute to that already. One of the things it also said is then you've got the non-core activities, and it says in there, if there, for example, there is an estate, for most of our housing.
I was in a meeting because I was.
Can someone mute Tony? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say the where there's, for example, if there's a council estate, most of, well, the grounds maintenance paid for by housing, and there would be an expectation that general fund would actually contribute. And also, if you take the example of the Great Estates parking schemes, at the moment they are all fully funded by the housing revenue account. But we have got a situation where you might actually only have 40% of the residents who benefit being tenants, and there's an expectation within the statute and by the regulator that there should be a proportionate contribution from the general fund. Clearly, general fund position means that's very difficult, and if we want anyone to benefit at all, the common sense solution is we do the work. And we justify it, but we have to be consulting with tenants on that spend. Technically, the ministry could come in and say, pay it all back and everything you've spent over the last 10 years. Unlikely, because there'll be a lot of very frightened stock holding local authorities if that was the case. But we have to be pragmatic about it.
Okay, and can I ask about leaseholders? I was going to ask, I had a general question. Does this apply equally to leaseholders? But I think also in with regard to your last point, do we need to look at say on the Great Estates parking schemes, you might have 40% tenants, but a lot of the other people will be leaseholders that are in ex right to buy properties. Should we be building into their leaseholder charges a contribution towards those kind of schemes, as they are benefiting?
Yeah, I mean, the leaseholders are actually tenants. They're tenants with a long lease, and so, for example, if we were doing works on the Great Estates on a block, it's justifiable income, and the ground rent and the service charge income relating to leaseholders comes through the housing revenue account. So there's no problem with leaseholders incorporating into the wider estate. We have a new lease which we've just started using about a year and a half ago, which makes provision for it, but it's not a retrospective lease. So the 700 odd leaseholders who exist already won't ever be caught by it. So there is a provision, but it'll be just a small number going forward.
Okay, it's a shame it wasn't thought of at the time.
In 1985 and so on, yes.
Okay, my final point, I promise. It was just about allocations. I'm really interested in what it says in there about allocations not just being fair, which of course is something that we've always made a priority, but should also take into account the impact on the local community. I was just wanted to ask your thoughts really about what could that mean? What does that mean? What could it mean for us?
Yeah, I think there's a number of themes in there. I think part of it is to trying to balance communities, and although you might find that you've got if we take Riverside Court, for example, where we've done a lot of work with residents involved in the project team to improve both the physical environment, lighting, all the laundry and so on. One of the things we did do was to look to balance the allocations, because historically Riverside Court had a high level of people with vulnerabilities and high needs, and we had lots of cuckooing and all sorts of things going on there, closure orders, and we looked to try and tip that balance so there was a more balanced community. So we deliberately made some changes so that people who were more vulnerable, were not necessarily asked to live in that, and people were bidding on it, they wanted to live there because it's popular, but we did want to make a much more balanced community and make all round people much more able to work together. And I think residents in Riverside Court have welcomed that. And I think that's one example. Oxford is tiny, though, by comparison to the geography of many other local authorities. So I think and also RPs, many of whom work with dozens and dozens of different local authorities. So I think there's a wider thing there, but balanced communities, I think, is the key, and obviously to being very careful and sensitive to lettings where there has been problems. So if there have been areas experiencing problems, to try and do something to give some relief and to help people. It's linking all in through with the antisocial behaviour theme, the domestic abuse theme. It really is a whole package.
Okay, well, it's good to hear it's not a completely new concept. Okay, anyone else before we wrap up this item? Wendy.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much. I'd just like to quickly pay tribute to the ambassadors that we already have. We're a small team. Tenant involvement only has 5 of us at the moment, but we have a very strong ambassador group, and they're working extremely hard with us to share what we do, how we do it, spread the engagement. And I find the social housing white paper very exciting for the future. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where it goes and what the recommendations are that come out of it from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah, I'd echo that. We're really grateful to all of the work that our tenant ambassadors give up their time to provide to help us improve services at the council. So thank you very much. That's probably a good note to end that item.
I'm just conscious that we haven't heard from Brenda or Olga, and I wondered whether it might be worth just giving sort of, if either of them did want to ask any questions or make any comments, to offer a sort of platform now to say anything if they did have any response to what they've heard. Are you happy to do that, Chair?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Brenda, Olga, is there anything you'd like to add?
Just appreciation for, I'm aware I came in late, but appreciation for what I've heard. I just have one question which may belong somewhere else, but I'm just very conscious about accessibility and adaptability of homes and whether that dovetails in somehow, but I may have missed some parts earlier where that's been covered. So it's just a question.
Not explicitly, but behind the scenes, I mean, all our new build properties are built to lifetime home standards as standard, and there's also a requirement now that all our new builds will have, that new build flat blocks will have lifts in, even if it's just 2 floors. So there are great steps being taken across the piece in terms of accessibility. There is always going to be much more that needs to be done, and I'm conscious that, you know, some of the estates will need a lot of work, the same as the city centre and other places across the city will need work. There are clear challenges with some existing stock and accessibility. Some of the retrofitting work obviously will need tailored individual approaches. Obviously Malcolm was discussing it. It will be down to individual needs as to how we actually work with an individual, around them and with them, and to deliver the improvements that are needed to homes.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I did try reading through that white paper, and I'm afraid I gave up. So I've been very grateful to Bill for his presentation this evening. It makes things a lot clearer when you're not used to reading the stuff that the government put out. It is very confusing for you, but we've had an awful lot of help from the tenant involvement team, explaining things to us and breaking it down into small pieces, which is much better for us that are not used to dealing with these big things like white papers. So I just like to say thank you, and also thanks to the council for the support that you do give to the tenant involvement team. I know of people in other parts of the country who get absolutely no help whatsoever from their councils. They just don't seem to be interested in truly involving their tenants like we get here in Oxford.
Thank you, Brenda. Thanks, Brenda. Okay, with that, we'll wrap up. So thank you very much, Bill. I think that was a really helpful presentation.
Before Bill goes, Chair, so next meeting is 4th of November, but that's got a full full lot of reports to come. The one after that would be 2nd of February. Do you want to schedule something for December then? And Bill, is what has been requested deliverable in that time frame?
Or could we do this in February? Is there a reason why we couldn't do this in February?
We could do it in February. I thought you were just keen to crack on.
Well, I am keen, but I can wait.
If you're happy to do it in February, then I think that's the simplest.
Let's do it in February, because I think it's worth maybe like taking as much time as possible to get the latest information about what the council is actually doing and how we're getting ready for this. So I think February would be fine. It's the 2nd of February, isn't it? Beginning of February. So let's add it to the work programme for then. Is everyone happy with that? Yeah, okay. And that takes us neatly on to item 8, which is dates of next meetings. As we've heard, we've got one on the 4th of November, the work programme for that we agreed at the start of this meeting. 2nd of February, where we will return to the themes we've discussed this evening on the social housing white paper. And then we've got one scheduled for the 4th of April. And members of the housing panel will also be invited to join a meeting of the budget review group, which will be talking about the housing budgets. And that is, the date hasn't been fixed yet, but it's likely to be at the start of January to mid-January. Is that right, Tom?
That's correct. So either the most likely dates are the 6th of January or the 10th of January, and probably the 10th, leaning that way. But if you can keep both sort of in your diary just in case, then that'll be useful. Oh, there's a question.
It's not a question. Would you mind if I just quickly lodged my apologies for the next meeting? Because I'm really sorry, I'm going to be, I think, out of the country. Otherwise I would be there.
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Lizzie, for letting us know. Right, my internet connection has just become very unstable, so it's probably a good time to finish up. But thank you very much, everyone. I think that was another good meeting. So thanks very much, and see you next